Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Hope all of you are doing well. I know you must be a bit relieved by the news of the delay of MRCOG 2 exam, and but this is the golden period where you can utilize your time in doing detailed study of each and every topic, and thus making a foundation not only for part 2 but as well as for part 3. And so all the best. Keep working hard. And so today the topic is just a second. Yeah. So for today the topic is headache in pregnancy and idiopathic intracranial hypertension in pregnancy. So these two topics have combined together, and there's one more topic which is stroke in pregnancy, which I'll be making a video shortly in some time. So this headache in pregnancy is I won't say it's a difficult topic, because once you understand the concepts and the buzzwords and learn how to differentiate between different types of headache, you can easily select the proper answer, especially while answering an EMQ. And usually you will find at least one or two questions either in the SBA or in the EMQ form in each recall. So to begin with, so headache is usually common in life and pregnancy. There are basically two types, primary and secondary. Primary, which is usually benign, either migraine or tension headache, and secondary, which is usually secondary to some specific pathology in the body. For example, impending eclampsia, CVT. So another important point is approximately 90% of the headaches in pregnancy are migraine or tension type headaches. So this I've highlighted separately because these are the statistical values which are quite important. They might come up in the exam. So usually 90% of the headache in pregnancy is migraine or tension type headache. So please remember this. So now to elaborate the key causes of headache in pregnancy, primary, as I've already told, there are two causes, tension and migraine. Secondary can be due to hypertension. It can be due to subarachnoid hemorrhage. It can be iatrogenic or drug related, for example, calcium channel blocker in the form of nifedipine or drug overuse. Then it can be due to postdural tap, can be due to infection, meningitis, anemia, caffeine withdrawal, idiopathic intracranial hypertension, stroke, AV malformation. So you must remember that in pregnancy, any AV malformation, they have the tendency to enlarge and they might cause internal bleeding. Then there can be tumors which can be primary or metastatic. Now coming to the assessment of a pregnant patient with headache. So like any other clinical scenario, you have to take a history and do an examination. So in these kind of patients, history as well as neurological examination is quite important because it will point to a specific particular diagnosis. So in history, you have to ask the details of the headache, which is duration, whether it is of short duration or long duration, location, which part of the head, like whether it is frontal, orbital, supraorbital, retrobulbar, parieto-occipital or occipital, because all these locations will point to a particular specific diagnosis, which I will come and describe later on. Now, frequency of headache, whether it is once in a day or 10 times in a day or once in a week, once in a month. Then severity, whether it is mild in intensity or severe intensity, or like the worst headache of their life. So these things are quite important. Family history, like migraine runs in the family. Associated symptoms, like whether the patient has nausea, vomiting, blurring of vision, or any kind of visual symptoms, or any focal neurological symptoms. So all these associated symptoms are important, and relationship to this and previous pregnancies, as well as red flag signs. The red flag signs are very, very important, and they point to some kind of a sinister pathology. So you must remember what these red flag signs are for, which I will deal with in the next slide. And they also point to a particular diagnosis, and they help you reach to a particular diagnosis and thus start the management. The neurological examination involves eye examination, cranial nerve examination, limb, motor examination, sensory examination, and reflexes and all these things. So neurological examination, eye examination involves visual field assessment, fundoscopy, pupillary reaction. Then in the limb assessment, you have to see the tone, power, reflexes, and coordination and plantar response. So plantar response, as you already know from your MBBS or basic qualification, that extensor plantar response, that is positive Babinsky sign, is a sign of meningeal irritation that is suggestive of some upper motor neuron pathology. Then third important point is after 20 weeks of gestation, so if a patient presents with headache, it's a rule of thumb rule that you have to assess her blood pressure, rule out proteinuria and clonus. It should be assessed, and preeclampsia should be ruled out, especially after 20 weeks of gestation. So what are the red flag features for potential secondary headache? First is thunderclap. So why it's thunderclap? Because it is high in intensity and it's very sudden onset and rapid time to peak headache intensity, like within seconds to 5 minutes, it can reach very high intensity. For example, it can happen with a subarachnoid hemorrhage, where a patient usually describes the headache as the worst headache of their life. Second red flag feature is focal neurological symptoms, for example, limb weakness, aura less than 5 minutes or more than 1 hour. Non-focal neurological symptoms, for example, cognitive disturbance, which is seen in central venous thrombosis. Abnormal neurological examination. Then headache that changes with posture, which is usually found in post-dural puncture headache, a sign of high or low CSF pressure. Then headache awakening the patient, which is usually associated with migraine and raised intracranial pressure. Then headache precipitated by physical exertion or Valsalva maneuver. Then consider subarachnoid hemorrhage or raised intracranial pressure. Then jaw claudication or visual disturbance, which is associated with giant cell arteritis. Age is a very important factor. If suppose an old female presenting with jaw claudication, then always select giant cell arteritis. Then if in the clinical scenario or in the question fever along with neck rigidity or stiffness, it's given, then probably it is meningitis. So now I will deal with the headache individually, and so that you are able to remember what it is actually, why it is happening, what are the important statistical points related with each type of headache. So first of all, let's study post-dural puncture headache. So the first important thing is, which is important according to exam, it occurs in 0.5 to 2.5% of epidurals. All right. So with the epidural needle, there is a chance that while giving epidural, 0.5 to 2.5% of times, the dura might be punctured. And if it is punctured, then there is 70 to 80% of chance that a post-dural puncture headache will happen. All right. So these 2 points, always remember. So what type of a headache is that? So it is usually in the fronto-occipital region, but it can radiate to the neck. And it is characteristically worse on the standing, as I've already told, that postural headache, because why? The CSF pressure changes. So characteristically worse on standing and typically develops 24 to 48 hours post-puncture. Conservative management includes hydration and simple analgesics, and untreated, the headache typically lasts for 7 to 10 days, but can last up to 6 weeks. All right. Another important point regarding PDP is epidural blood patch has a 60 to 90% cure rate. So all the highlighted points, please remember, these are important according to the exam, and at least 3 questions can be picked up straight just from this topic, just from this one paragraph. All right. So epidural blood patch has a cure rate of 60 to 90%. Okay. So coming to the next type of headache, which is very important, again, it is migraine. So first important point, what happens during pregnancy? There is rise in estrogen, all right? And estrogen is equal to aura. So always remember that. But pregnancy itself leads to a reduction in the frequency and severity of attacks of migraine without aura. All right. So always remember that it reduces the frequency and intensity of attacks of migraine without aura, because estrogen, it can cause symptoms like aura even without headache. So in pregnancy, the third point, if you can see here, that highlighted in yellow, it says that pregnancy can trigger attacks of aura without headache as a result of high plasma concentrations of estrogen. All right. So these 2 points, pregnancy high estrogen can lead to increased attacks of aura even without headache, but it decreases the intensity and frequency of attacks of migraine without aura. So now coming to the description of migraine headache, it is unilateral, pulsating or throbbing, builds up over minutes to hours, moderate to severe in intensity, associated with nausea and vomiting, and or sensitivity to light or photophobia, and or sensitivity to sound, disabling, aggravated by routine physical activity. And in the previous slide, as we have already discussed, it can awaken the patient from sleep. So migraine, most of the people know, and most of the people must have seen patients coming with complaints of symptoms suggestive of migraine. So you must be knowing all these symptoms already, I guess. So all of you already know that unilateral throbbing, and it impairs the day-to-day routine activity, usually associated with nausea, vomiting, photophobia, visual symptoms, or fortification spectrum, and all these things. So what would you do if a pregnant patient with migraine comes to you? So initial management will be conservative. So avoidance of precipitants, give her rest, hydration, regular meals and relaxation. And you can generally give a safe um, analgesics like paracetamol and antiemetics to control nausea and vomiting. So usually triptans, they are used out of pregnancy. Then women experiencing 3 to 4 headaches a month, they may be considered for prophylactic treatment, especially when the headache is unresponsive to simple analgesia. So if prophylaxis is required, propranolol 10 to 40 milligram 3 times a day has the best evidence of safety in pregnancy and lactation. Amitriptyline in the lowest effective dose 25 to 50 milligram at night may also be used. All right. So prophylaxis in pregnancy, propranolol. So you see PPP. Prophylaxis, pregnancy, propranolol. So it is safe and it can be used either in pregnancy and lactation. Another alternative is amitriptyline. Now, very, very important point, and I think all of you must have already come across this question. It has been asked like hundreds of times in the exam recalls. And so this is twofold. Migraine increases twofold risk of preeclampsia, fourfold increased risk of acute MI, and 17-fold increased risk of stroke. All right. So how would you remember that? So if you see that preeclampsia, there are two words, preeclampsia. So there's twofold increased risk. All right. And fourfold increased risk of acute MI. So heart has 4 chambers. So you can remember that heart has 4 chambers. So that's why fourfold increased risk. And 17-fold increased risk of a stroke. That is S for 17 and S for stroke. Another way to remember is that twofold increased risk of preeclampsia, then 2 2s is a 4, that is fourfold increased risk of acute MI, and 4 into 4 is 16, that is approximately 17-fold increased risk of stroke. So whatever you feel like, whichever way you like, please remember this data, because this is very important. All right. Another favorite topic of the examiners, which is cluster headache. So, in a general population, it is predominantly found in men. Okay, and but in pregnant females also it might be there. And how would you describe the pain? It is very, very characteristic, very simple and easy to remember. That is headache, which is around the eye, and it will have the ipsilateral visual symptoms as well as the nasal symptoms. So if these features are there, please go ahead and select cluster headache. There's no other option which would describe this particular headache as any other option. So it is very severe or severe in intensity, usually short duration. On an average, it lasts for about 45 to 60 minutes. And usually we find clustering of attacks, like frequency. If you ask the patient, it can be between 1 to 10 in a day. And as I've already told, it is unilateral pain in orbital, that is in the eye or around the eye or temporal region. And headache is accompanied by ipsilateral eye symptoms like excessive tearing of eyes, redness of eyes, eyelid swelling, and ipsilateral nasal congestion or runny nose may be there. And patient is extremely restless, stressed, agitated. So these are the typical features of cluster headache. So these are the symptoms you need to remember, that short duration, clustering of attacks, unilateral, orbital or supraorbital region, ipsilateral eye symptoms, nasal symptoms. All right. Now, another important question which has come up several times in the exam, and there are few key words which would help you identify that yes, this is the diagnosis. So idiopathic means what? There's no such known etiology for this. Okay. And intracranial hypertension. So name itself suggests that this particular pathology has no etiology. There is rise in intracranial pressure, and it is typically found in obese women of childbearing age. Okay. So this is the whole crunch of this idiopathic intracranial hypertension. So remember this point, it is typical in obese women of childbearing age. As I've already told you, it is due to unknown etiology, and some studies have shown that it is due to disordered CSF dynamics. What does this mean? It means that um, either there is increase in amount of CSF production, or there is a decrease in amount of CSF absorption. Either way, it will lead to increase in CSF amount and thus increase intracranial pressure. So because of this, you'll have signs and symptoms of increased ICP, and which can lead to headache and transient visual obscuration. So in this idiopathic intracranial hypertension, headache is typically a throbbing retrobulbar headache that can worsen with eye movements, aggravated by coughing or straining, and is associated with diplopia in 38% of patients and visual loss 31% with papilledema. So to understand this headache more, as I've told you, there is rise in intracranial pressure. So what would this do? So this rise in intracranial pressure would eventually lead to rise in which eventually lead to papilledema, and it can lead to optic nerve atrophy. So that's why headache along with visual symptoms. So it can be associated with diplopia 38% and visual loss 31%. All right. And it is typically a throbbing retrobulbar headache, but it can be generalized as well. The typical presentation is throbbing and retrobulbar. Now, this condition may aggravate pre-existent migraine. Now, another important point is it's a diagnosis of exclusion of other causes of raised CSF pressure. All right. Now, diagnosis requires excluding other causes of raised CSF pressure and finding abnormally elevated opening CSF pressure of more than 25 centimeter of water on lumbar puncture. So this is the diagnostic point on investigation. While doing lumbar puncture, when you open because of raised ICP, the opening pressure is more than 250 mm of water or more than 225 centimeter of water. Management includes monitoring of the visual fields and visual acuity because of the risk of optic nerve infarction, and women should be encouraged to limit weight gain. Now, treatment would be obviously directed towards lowering of the pressure. It can be either therapeutic lumbar puncture. Therapeutic means where the CSF will be drained and the pressure will be lowered, or use acetazolamide 500 milligram twice daily is directed towards improving the headache and preventing visual loss. All right, so hope you have understood the pathophysiology along with the symptoms, along with how will you manage the patient, what is the goal of the management. So this is the basic gist of idiopathic intracranial hypertension. Okay. So now coming to another important pathology, which is preeclampsia, and all of you must be familiar with this, so I need not go into much details. But according to the talk article, the diagnostic criteria for headache attributed to preeclampsia or eclampsia has few criteria points. First is headache in a woman who is pregnant or in the puerperium, fulfilling criterion C. Second point, preeclampsia or eclampsia has been already diagnosed. Third is evidence of causation demonstrated by at least two of the following. Headache has developed in temporal relation to the onset of preeclampsia or eclampsia, then either or both of the following. Headache has significantly worsened in parallel with worsening of the preeclampsia or eclampsia, and headache has significantly improved or resolved in parallel with improvement in or resolution of the preeclampsia or eclampsia. Then headache has at least two of the following three characteristics: bilateral, pulsating, aggravated by physical activity. Then fourth, it is not better accounted by another ICHD 3 diagnosis. Okay. So ICHD, I think it is international classification of headache in diagnosing in headache. I think this is this. I don't exactly remember. So this is the thing. So basically, in preeclampsia, the question will not involve all this. So they will give you basically a clinical scenario where there will be a pregnant female, and they might give you other signs and symptoms associated with impending eclampsia, such as abdominal pain or photophobia. I mean, other features of HELP syndrome, and they might give you lab values along with that, with full blood count showing thrombocytopenia or raised liver enzymes or significant proteinuria. So obviously, then this particular diagnosis will point towards preeclampsia. All right. Okay. So there's another pathology which is known as PRESS, which is posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome. The big term. All right. So to simplify it, the first point you need to remember it is it's a clinical neuroradiological entity associated with preeclampsia. Okay, so this is a pathology which is associated with preeclampsia. It is characterized by headache, vomiting, visual disturbances, seizures, and altered mental state with radiological findings of edema in the posterior circulation of the brain. So that's why it's a clinical neuroradiological entity. Why? Because along with the symptoms, signs and symptoms of preeclampsia, you will find a radiological finding of edema in the posterior circulation of the brain. And in PRESS, what happens is that autoregulatory response to maintain the cerebral blood flow is impaired, leading to breakdown of the normal blood-brain barrier and culminating in vasogenic brain edema. So edema leads to progressive brain compression within the skull and the symptoms of headache, nausea, vomiting, and seizures. So here, endothelial dysfunction associated with the pathophysiology of preeclampsia. So when PRESS is associated with preeclampsia, management follows the treatment algorithm for severe preeclampsia with BP control, prevention and a treatment of seizures, and prompt delivery of the baby. So as you would have managed any patient with impending eclampsia, similarly you have to manage a patient with PRESS, because this is a clinical entity, neuroradiological, which is associated with preeclampsia with severe manifestations, because now it has reached up to the brain, leading to endothelial dysfunction, damaging blood-brain barrier, leading to vasogenic edema, and thus leading to compression symptoms. Okay. Detail of PRESS I have covered in stroke. So what you would find in the radiological imaging and all that, we will discuss in the stroke in pregnancy topic. Now there's another entity which is known as reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. So what is it? It is multifocal arterial constriction and dilation. It has a significant association with the postpartum period. All right. Next point is it is characterized by recurrent sudden onset and severe headaches over 1 to 3 weeks, often accompanied by nausea, vomiting, photophobia, confusion, and blurred vision. Diagnosis requires the demonstration of diffuse arterial bleeding on cerebral angiography with resolution within 1 to 3 months. And since it involves the blood vessels, and you have to exclude the subarachnoid hemorrhage because the symptoms mimic. Now, treatment is currently based on expert opinion, including the use of calcium channel blockers, high dose corticosteroids, and magnesium sulfate. Till now, no question has been asked on this topic, but still to remember what this is. It is reversible. The name itself suggests reversible. All right, so it is reversible. It can spontaneously resolute in 1 to 3 months. All right, cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. Vasoconstriction means there is arterial constriction and dilation. One point you need to remember is significant association with postpartum period. So any patient in postpartum period presenting with these kind of symptoms and on cerebral angiography, if it is showing bleeding pattern, so diffuse arterial bleeding, then diagnosis is reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. Now, very important topic, again and again and again questions have been asked on this topic, which is cerebral venous thrombosis. So what are the key points you need to remember? First, what is the incidence? It is 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 10,000 deliveries. This might happen. Now, all the prothrombotic risk factors can predispose to developing CVT. So as all of us already know that pregnancy is itself a risk factor. Why? Because pregnancy in itself is a prothrombotic state. So pregnancy probably as a result of prothrombotic changes and dehydration, it can be a recognized risk factor. Then along with that, which can further increase the risk of CVT is cesarean section, systemic infection, vomiting and anemia. They might further increase the risk. Okay, so first point. Second important point is greatest risk period is the third trimester and the first 4 weeks postpartum. So in the question, if obese women presenting with these symptoms in third trimester or immediate postpartum, always think about CVT. Now, another important point is location. So location, it is most commonly thrombosis of the sagittal sinus with secondary extension into the cortical veins, or primary thrombosis of one of the cortical veins are the most common sites of involvement in pregnancy. Okay. So on imaging, you will usually find that the question stating like there is a filling defect in the sagittal sinus in the posterior part, or things like that, which can be suggestive of CVT. So how does CVT present? Why is it so important in headache in pregnancy? Because headache is the most frequently occurring symptom in CVT and often the first symptom reported by patients. So as you see now, why headache is so important in case of CVT? Because in 80 to 90% of patients with CVT, it is the most frequent symptom and often the first reported symptom. So that's why if any patient comes with headache, you must not take it very lightly in pregnancy, because if they're responding to simple analgesics, probably fine. But if they're not, then always rule out some sinister pathology like CVT. It can happen in any age group, in because you don't know what are the risk factors that particular woman is carrying. So headache is usually acute or subacute in onset, localized, continuous, and moderate to severe in intensity, usually associated with papilledema, focal deficits, altered consciousness, cognitive disturbances, seizures, and cranial nerve signs, in particular, diplopia caused by the sixth nerve palsy. So these are the symptoms in the question in the clinical scenario. They can give you that headache along with papilledema, focal deficits, altered cognition, then diplopia. So all these symptoms, these are very typical of CVT. Then CT is widely used as the initial imaging tool, but imaging modality of choice is MRI with T2 weighted imaging, and MRV, that is magnetic resonance venography, is the imaging modality of choice. The treatment, usually anticoagulation with low molecular weight heparin, should be continued typically for 6 months. And CVT associated with pregnancy and puerperium tends to have a better outcome with a lower mortality rate. It is not a contraindication for future pregnancies, but women should be counseled that they are at risk of further venous thrombotic events and they will require prophylaxis with low molecular weight heparin during pregnancy and the postpartum. All right. So this is the point you need to remember. So you need to treat with the low molecular weight heparin and continued postpartum for 3 to 6 months. Okay. So coming to the summary of these headaches. So already I have described the key features. Now again, I'm trying to summarize here. So idiopathic intracranial hypertension, retroorbital headache, throbbing, young obese women, raised CSF pressure, diplopia, papilledema, and diagnostic point is on lumbar puncture, opening CSF pressure more than 25 centimeters of water. So if this is the scenario, idiopathic intracranial hypertension. So these are the buzzwords you need to remember. Subarachnoid hemorrhage. So thunderclap headache or worst headache of life. Then since there is internal bleeding, usually the clinical scenario will have the word collapse, sudden collapse. Then other signs of raised intracranial pressure like papilledema, associated vomiting, neck stiffness, loss of consciousness. Focal neurological signs might be there. And on CT or MRI brain, MR angiography, you will get to know the diagnosis. Now CVT, typically in third trimester postpartum, associated with seizures, vomiting, photophobia, other signs of raised ICP. Then, as we have already discussed, that sixth nerve palsy, that is diplopia, diplopia is there. Then, if the question has other risk factors for thrombosis, like patient has some kind of inherited thrombophilic disorder, or patient is obese, or there is previous history of any such thrombotic event in the patient. So these are typical clinical scenario. Then you have to suspect CVT. And on investigation, filling defect in the sagittal sinus most commonly found. Okay. Now, meningitis, fever, photophobia, vomiting, neck stiffness. So these are the buzzwords: fever, neck stiffness, meningitis. If there is petechial rash also, this is suggestive of meningococcal infection. So you'll need to do blood culture, lumbar puncture, CT scan. Tension headache. So tension headache, it is usually related to periods of stress. It can be band-like, pressing or squeezing. So these are the three words which usually describe the pattern of headache. So it's like band-like, pressing or squeezing kind of a headache. Cluster headache, we already discussed, excruciating pain behind or around one eye, but may radiate to other areas of face, head, and neck. Unilateral headache plus eye symptoms, including watery eyes and running nose. So, any unilateral headache localized around the eye plus eye symptoms or nasal symptoms, select cluster headache. Migraine, again, unilateral throbbing, visual symptoms, with or without aura, fortification spectrum, nausea, vomiting, photophobia. More on awakening. Drug related headache, always look in the question of the specific points they have mentioned. Like if any particular drug has been mentioned, especially calcium channel blockers like nifedipine or vasodilators, it can be a cause of headache. Then preeclampsia or impending eclampsia. So look at the pregnancy gestational age, if it is more than 20 weeks or postpartum, and may be associated with other symptoms of HELLP syndrome. Like in the clinical scenario, they might give you abdominal pain, photophobia, and other visual symptoms like blurring of vision and papilledema is there, and other biochemical lab features like raised blood pressure, proteinuria, then renal function or liver enzymes might be raised, thrombocytopenia, uric acid might be raised. So all these biochemical and clinical features, you have to underline each and every important point and then come to a diagnosis. Then postdural puncture headache, as we have already discussed, it is associated with postdural tap following epidural, and it is usually frontal, more on standing, and usually subsides spontaneously in 7 to 10 days without treatment. This slide I've added, which you need to remember separately. It will help you in remembering few points in stroke and pregnancy, and as well as general points of imaging in pregnancy. Few questions have been asked sometimes based on this slide as well. So like, what is the accepted background cumulative dose of ionizing radiation during pregnancy? This is 50 milligray. Then fetal exposure for a CT scan of the head is estimated at less than 0.005 milligray. MRI should be avoided in the first trimester because of the potential hazards of hyperthermia and acoustic noise. But MRI remains preferable to any studies using ionizing radiation because MRI does not involve these harmful effects of ionizing radiation. So that's why it's safe. Contrast media based on element iodine should be avoided in pregnancy unless essential. And if iodinated contrast media are used, then the neonatal thyroid function should be checked. Gadolinium based contrast agents appear to be safe in pregnancy, but studies are still limited. Lactating women who receive iodinated contrast or gadolinium can continue breastfeeding without interruption. Okay. So these were the important points related to headache in pregnancy and idiopathic intracranial hypertension in pregnancy. I've tried to summarize and highlight all the important points that were found, that were there in TOG articles. So hope you find this video useful. Okay, take care, stay safe. Thank you. God bless.